Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Joy in Dementia. I am really excited today to introduce you to a friend of mine, Dr. Domingo, and he is a licensed clinical psychologist in Sarasota, Florida. Angelo Domingo is a trained neuropsychologist, and he's the director of the psychology clinic at Parkinson Place. And Parkinson Place is a community center for people with Lewy body dementia and Parkinson's, and they have support groups, speech therapy, and many other services. Angelo also has his own private practice where he meets with people with dementia and their spouses. And I forgot to do my intro as well. My name is Laura Smothers-Chu. I am the CEO and founder of Befriended Heart, where I help long-distance daughters navigate their parents' dementia. So back to Angelo. Angelo, welcome to Joy in Dementia. It's great to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your expertise in addition to what I talked about with your intro?
Sure. I actually started my career as a trained neuropsychologist. I spent 4 years in neurosurgery doing evaluations for surgical candidates and people with dementia or other neurological conditions. And then I got a bit burnt out on the testing piece and wanted to make a bigger impact in people's lives than just delivering bad news and sending them on their way or good news and sending them on their way. So I started to shift my focus to psychotherapy. And I find that my background in neuropsychology really allows me to help caregivers understand what's happening in their loved ones' brains. And it also helps those people that are dealing with the chronic neurological condition understand what's happening to them and be a little less frightened.
Which is so important because I think, the way that the media and our society creates this picture of dementia, it's very depressing and scary.
Oh, yeah. And, if you have a loved one who has Alzheimer's dementia or frontotemporal dementia, a lot of the time they don't really know what's happening to them, so they may not be afraid. But other types of neurological conditions, people are very much aware of what's happening to them, and fear is a big component of that
Absolutely.
emotional process.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. My dad, he had Alzheimer's, and I think he was unique in that he was still pretty with it early on in his diagnosis. And
Uh-huh.
so he was able to know that something was not right.
Mhm.
And just that he was really scared. And I think that added to his isolation, that he started to isolate himself. And I know that that's pretty common with people after they get a diagnosis.
They're embarrassed a lot of the time.
Yeah.
They can't keep up with a conversation, but they're too embarrassed to ask people to repeat themselves or to say, I didn't quite follow that. So yes, they tend to isolate, and that can often ramp up depression, anxiety, and cognitive losses.
Yes. I know, Angelo, you're a PsyD. Can you talk about how that's a little different from like a PhD or a social worker? I know for us, not in the psychology field, we sort of feel like, what's the difference from all these things? Because they're all on
Right.
the Psychology Today website.
Mhm. So a PsyD is a professional doctorate. Before the PsyD was developed, if you wanted to be a psychologist, the only route you had was a PhD.
Hmm.
And that's a very academic degree. So you get a lot of research expertise with a smattering of clinical. Whereas the PsyD, you get a lot of clinical experience with a smattering of research.
Hmm.
So the emphasis is on practice
Got it.
more so than on a PhD.
Awesome. I've never known that, so thanks for explaining that.
Oh, sure, you're very welcome.
And so I know that you've had extensive experience working with people with dementia as a neuropsychologist. Have you had any personal experience with dementia?
So, in terms of my family, no, not particularly.
Hmm.
I've been doing this so long, though. When you ask if I have personal experience, you get attached to clients, and watching them decline is sometimes a rather emotional process. But in terms of my family, no. The closest that I've come to caregiving in my own life was when my mom was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 1994.
Hmm.
She passed away almost a year to the day of the diagnosis.
Wow.
And I witnessed my father, who was running a business of his own at the time, drop everything to be by her side. He barely slept that year. It was an awful year for my family. And my role really was to support him. So I would run the business as best as I could,
Hmm.
kind of hold down the fort while he tended to my mom. And it was really interesting. After she passed away, my dad said, all these years I spent working 16-hour days. And this past year, I was hardly at the store and it survived.
Hmm. Yeah, with your help, and I think you mentioned too earlier, Angelo, that your parents came from Italy, and so they helped your family grow all by themselves, and yeah, so he knew hard work, and this was a struggle for him, right?
Oh, yes. When he stowed away on a cargo ship, he came illegally.
Wow.
Yeah. 24 days in the engine room of a cargo ship. Um, and he would work round the clock in construction,
Hmm.
because that's where a lot of immigrants would go into construction. If I may take a second to tell a funny story, my dad
Yeah.
immigration at the time, this was in the 1950s, immigration would raid construction sites because that's where a lot of the illegal immigrants would go to work. So all the illegals used to run when immigration would raid the site. And my dad said he would just sit and eat his sandwich and not open his mouth because he barely spoke English, and he would wave to the immigration officer with a smile.
That's
So because he
great.
didn't run, they just assumed that he was a citizen.
Right. That's hilarious. He's
Yeah,
smart, man. He knows how to survive.
that's exactly.
So how did this experience as a son of, your dad being an immigrant and also your mom passing away from pancreatic cancer, how did that all shape your career?
Well, I knew in that moment just how difficult caregiving can be. You know, th- that year I watched my father exhaust himself, and that was only 1 year. Imagine if you're doing this for 10 years, 12 years, 16 years, 20 years.
Yeah,
So there are very few populations out there that have such a great need and are so underserved because the stress never goes away. When you're a caregiver, the stress only ramps up. You get a grip on the condition and then the condition changes. And
absolutely. Yeah. So let's get into your recommendations. What would you say is the first recommendation for long distance daughters to really understand what their caregiving parent is going through?
before I give my first recommendation, I just want to say that I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to speak to long distance daughters because I deal mainly with spouses.
Hmm.
I hear often from the spouse's perspective what it's like for them to talk to their children or their loved ones' children in the cases where it's a second marriage, their stepchildren.
Hmm.
And the biggest issue is when a long distance daughter or son doesn't really accept what the spouse is saying at face value. I mean, and every dynamic, every family dynamic is different, and sometimes there may be a reason why you don't want to accept it at face value. In general, though, listen to what your well parent is saying
Hmm.
because they're in it 24/7 and they know what it's like. And chances are it's harder on them than you can possibly imagine.
Yes, absolutely. And I can speak to that from experience too. And I've said in a couple of videos before this that I really wish I was more empathetic with my mom. And I think it's hard as a long distance caregiving daughter because you're going through your own grief too, and you're
Mhm.
trying to make sense. You know what I mean? So everyone's just like all going through grief, and they're all trying to make sense of this. And that's why it's so great to have people like you, Angelo, in the world that really speak, to caregiving spouses and help them. And then if long distance caregiving daughters can find a therapist as well. I mean, like everyone needs therapy because this
Mhm.
is hard, you know. And it's not anything to be embarrassed about, or I mean, it really is survival, and you need someone to talk to about your struggles that aren't always your friends and your fellow family. So yeah, absolutely.
Therapy really is about, in these circumstances, getting perspective.
Yes.
Because the spouse who's the primary caregiver, they often don't have a very good perspective because they don't understand from a neurological perspective what's happening in their loved one.
Right.
And as a long distance daughter or son, it's easy to think things are better than they actually are.
Hmm.
It's easy to kind of sweep things under the rug, and it's also easy to criticize. And so having someone in your own life as a long distance daughter to talk to and get a perspective on what it's like to be in this day in and day out can not only be helpful to you as a daughter, but also to your well parent who's
Yes.
carrying that
So
burden.
yeah, so let's talk about, Angelo, sort of what happens when a long distance caregiving daughter talks to, let's say, their mom is the forgetful parent and the father is the caregiving parent. Well, mom is just fine. I'm not sure what you're talking about. She talked with me, just, she seemed like she was in a good mood. It seemed like, she told me what she did that day. I don't know what the issue is, right?
So chances are your forgetful parent made up what they did that day um, based on their mood. And so there's a phenomenon called Showtime where people can pull themselves together. Well, their brains can. They're not, this is not a conscious process where they're
Mhm.
trying to, swindle their daughter or son. But their brains kind of pull themselves together long enough to be on, and they can be on for a couple of minutes and pass. You and I today were talking before this interview about how the time change affected us, right?
Yes.
And I said I need to put on my game face, like I need to be on for this because I'm lacking sleep.
Right.
Well, because this is a situation that's new and it's mildly stressful in a good way, my brain ramps up.
Hmm.
And you see that same phenomenon in the forgetful parent often.
Yes. Yes.
And
And I think we see that too. I know caregiving parents will say this, and if the daughter is visiting and you go to the doctor or something, right? Like
uh,
the forgetful parent will go to the doctor and just seem fine. You're like, no, no, they're not fine. That's happened with us too. So it's kind of a similar idea, right? Right, Dr. Domingo. That's just like the Showtime idea.
yeah, I had one caregiver. I mean, I hear this all the time, but one that stands out was her husband's children. So her stepchildren were visiting for the weekend, and her husband had Lewy body dementia.
Hmm.
And for the first day and a half, he had no hallucinations. And he said, for the first time, I wanted him to have a hallucination.
Right.
My stepkids think I was crazy.
Right. Right.
And then finally, the second day, we were preparing for dinner, and my husband says, "Are they coming to dinner too?" And there was nobody there. And she's like, "Hallelujah."
He's like, see, I'm
Yes,
not crazy.
I see what's happening. So yeah,
Uh,
Showtime.
that's a great story. So one thing that could make this a little easier as far as sort of trying to not see Showtime all the time is perhaps talking with your forgetful parent on the phone towards the end of the day. It's called sundowning, but they're less likely to be on like later in the day. Yeah.
And also a way to really to really get a clue as to how bad things are is confirm with your well parent exactly how the day went so you can see how accurate your
Mm,
forgetful parent is. Because people will, it's called confabulation. They're not lying, but their brain fills in the gaps with contextually relevant garbage.
right,
So if they're in a good mood, they'll just piece together memories from God knows what
right.
and create a day in their mind.
That's a great idea. Yeah. And so, what would you say for a second recommendation for long distance caregiving daughters?
Video chat. Video chat really allows you as a long distance daughter to see what your parent looks like, what the house looks like,
Hmm.
you know? And it also allows you to check in on your well parent and see how they're doing.
Yes. Yes. And I would say, the even better thing to video chat is really visiting your parents for, I would say, I mean, ideally 5 days, right, Angelo? I mean, you want to do one or two because that's not
So
enough time.
if they can get away, that is ideal.
Yeah.
And a minimum of 3 days because you're not going to really grasp what it's like if you're there for any less than 3 days.
Yes.
5 days would be terrific.
Yes.
And what I would also encourage is to tell the well parent to leave, to go, I mean, somewhere nearby, letting them leave to go have a spa day because you're not going to know as a daughter what it's really like to be the sole caregiver with them there because they're going to be um they're going to be covering for the forgetful parent. They're going to be anticipating your forgetful parent's needs.
Hmm.
Um, and so it doesn't really allow you as a daughter to have a grasp on what
Right.
it's
Right. I actually had my dad stay with me when he was in mid stage dementia. And I mean, I'm also like in the field, so I know what to expect and how to, address the needs. But I think it was really important for me, and you can do this too when you visit your parents and, your caregiving parent goes on a spa day, is, it really gives you meaningful memories with your forgetful parent. And that's really important. I think, especially now that my dad has passed, I don't have any regrets because I was still making memories with him even after the diagnosis of dementia. I didn't just, say, okay, well, I'm not going to deal with that, right? Which I know that some, daughters and sons do. And I think too that it's also great. I think, Angela, you brought this up, that it really gives a caregiving parent a break, right? That's
right.
like the biggest gift you can give your caregiving parent is a time of respite and have their own time. Because I know when my dad was with me, and I'm an only child, so it was just me and my dad, and my husband was at work, I couldn't take a shower.
Yep.
Like, I
Yep.
didn't realize how important it was that like I'd be with my dad the whole time, because if I had left the room or something, he could have wandered out the back door and wandered outside my neighborhood, right? So I had to always be with him. And you don't, it's one thing to know that conceptually. It's another thing
Right.
to actually experience it, right? So that was very telling for me. And at the end, when my mom came to pick up my dad, she and I, well, I guess before that, she and I had a conversation about how dad was doing. And there were things that I actually noticed about him that she wasn't able to notice because she was so close to
Hmm.
him. And I think it's easy, it's not, anything intentional, but we adapt as humans, right? And so we're just like, oh, this is the new normal. And my mom and I didn't talk every day at that point. So there were some things that I didn't know about. And so we kind of shared information, and that actually gave us a chance to talk about, okay, what are the qualities in the place where we would want to move dad, and that actually opened the conversation to talk about memory care that we wouldn't have even been able to have in the past. So it was extremely valuable for us to do that.
I I often tell my caregivers that I work with to explain to their children or stepchildren what it's like in terms of a job, because most long distance children, I say, are still working.
Hmm.
And so, I often tell them to tell their children to think about their role as being at a job they love. If you go on an interview for a job that you absolutely love, this job was made for you, and you nail the interview, um, and the interviewer says, "Well, we love you. We think you're the best, and we want to hire you right on the spot. So here are the details of the job. I don't think you're going to have a problem with the details because you love this job. So it's 24/7. There's no vacation, there's no lunch break, there are no benefits, there's no pay, and we're not even going to say thank you. Um, we're just going to take you for granted, but that should be all right because you love this job. And you're going to have to do this job 24/7 with no break and no support for years and years and years on end. We don't really know how long, but you'll just deal with it."
Oh, and by the way, every day gets worse.
Yeah, yeah,
So
there you
you're missing a stapler or you're missing a pen.
go. Right. I'm going to add that.
Yeah, and you have to adapt to missing a pen or missing a stapler and being creative about, using a pencil or, you know what I mean? So that's another aspect to it.
Exactly. And so, you know, when my caregivers think about it that way, it really validates their exhaustion. Like, you can love someone and recognize that you can't do this all on your own. You know, Loving someone and taking total responsibility for somebody are two very different things.
Mhm.
And it also helps, especially with the long distance kids, to really understand what it's like in terms that speak to those kids' experiences.
Absolutely. I love that scenario because I honestly wish that I had heard that scenario when my mom was going through this, early on into my dad's diagnosis,
Mhm.
because it would have been so much clearer for me. And so thank you for sharing that, Angelo.
Oh, you're so welcome. Um,
Yeah. So hopefully it helps you all as long distance caregiving daughters to really understand what your caregiving parent is going through. And so, Angela, we said a few recommendations. If
mhm.
there's, a long distance caregiving daughter can get one most important recommendation from these, what would you say is the takeaway point?
Support the primary caregiver, support them. Do not do not dismiss their needs. Do not invalidate their feelings. Even if as a long distance child you're going through a process of denial or having difficulty accepting that your forgetful parent has this condition, that's fine. Just don't lay that problem on the primary caregiver because they already have enough to worry about. you know
Yeah. Yeah.
so So support them and accept what they say and validate their experience and let them know that you're there for them.
Hmm.
Also, I would say if you're too busy to come in person, which happens, people have lives, try to do whatever else you can to support the primary caregiver. Whether it be video chat, some people with dementia don't really need someone there physically, especially at the beginning. They just need somebody who has eyes on them, even if it's remote. Video chat. You can give your parent a break for 20 minutes so they can take a shower. How beautiful is that, right?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Mhm. Also, if you have the financial resources, helping out and paying for caregiver services or daycare,
Hmm.
even one day a week to give your parent a break. Small things go a really long way.
Absolutely. And one thing, I mean, I share a very major thing that long distance caregiving daughters can do, doing the research and vetting different professionals to help your caregiving parent. And I mean, just the fact that like we have Google and everything, we can
Mhm.
search who the local professionals are. And my mom didn't have time to go through all the reviews for a financial planner, and so I did that and wrote three people down and said, "Hey, mom, I think these are the best ones in your local area. This is why. I think this one looks really good, but you make the final decision." And I think that was super helpful for her because she didn't have to worry about, who are the professionals I can trust and have to do that whole search and do the interview and all that. So, she of course was part of the interview, but I definitely did like the initial process. And that's something that we all have strength doing because we have full-time jobs and we are constantly working with different partners or hiring employees or things like that, so it's kind of
Mhm.
similar to what we're doing.
I would take that a step further and apply that same mindset to memory care facilities.
Hmm.
When you're researching memory care facilities, you want to look at the quality of the activities. How many hours of activities do they have a day? How engaged are the residents when you go there? You want to go there on a weekend. Especially a Sunday, like a Sunday evening, because if people are well taken care of on a Sunday evening, you can be pretty sure that they're going to be well taken care of the whole rest of the week.
Hmm.
Um, I would also say, and this isn't a hard and fast rule, but I've noticed a trend. There are a lot of memory care facilities popping up all around the country
Yep.
because our population is aging. The newer facilities, like the brand new facilities, they look stunning. 12-foot ceilings, crown molding, chandeliers. Well, on average, that's where your money's going, is to the 12-foot ceilings and the crown molding and chandeliers. You really want to look at the caregivers,
Hmm.
caregiver turnaround. How well do they take care of their staff? That's what matters.
Yep.
So if you go to a building that looks a little bit beat up and like it was built 20 years ago, those people know what they're doing because they've been doing it for 20 years.
Exactly.
Um, so disregard all of that showiness because it's irrelevant. And all of that is there for you, the caregiver, not for your loved one. So that would be my piece of advice on that.
Exactly. I think the chandeliers are not going to improve your forgetful parents' quality of life.
Exactly.
It's really the care that the caregivers are providing, the activities, something that they're having constant interaction with that's actually helping them with their dementia, So
Mhm.
yeah. Well, thank you so much, Angelo. And where can we find you?
My website, angelosdomingo.com. My middle name is Sebastian, so that's where the S comes from.
So angelosdomingo.com.
Mhm.
And I will put that in the description below so you all can check out his website. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Domingo, for joining me today. And thank you all for tuning in again for a guest expert interview. And I'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye, Laura. Thank you.